Sergio, Ed, and basically anyone who has a Wing Chun or Kung Fu background that I've ever worked with, they can like make it work, but only because they're also like pretty good at some form of grappling and some basic striking, and then they just flavor it with Kung Fu or Wing Chun or Silat or whatever.
That's how my functional, quote-unquote, Aikido looks like. It's 95% everything else and 5% some movement which looks like Aikido.
Yeah, and you can make it work because the other guy just didn't know it.
Right, exactly.
I have stuff from Kuk Sowan, which is kind of like not a real martial art. It's kind of Bushido, kind of McDojo-ish. And I have things from it that I can do that work really well. It took me like 5 years to master some of those things. I could teach him to a good MMA fighter in like an afternoon.
Right.
And he would be able to then do them right away while also knowing how to box and wrestle.
I know exactly what you mean. I showed a few Aikido moves to my BJJ coach and he did it better than I did from like the first go.
In Kuk Sowan, they do similar wrist locks like Kotagaish and stuff like that. So when I started doing BJJ, I was able to hit wrist locks that no one had shown me. I was able to understand when people were like trying to push out of my guard. I knew the ways that the wrist, you could manipulate it and the ways you could bend it to get a submission. I was familiar with them after years and years and years of mastering that. But then a BJJ guy would you just need to show them, just pull on their elbow and they'll have to tap. And they're like, oh, okay. And they could do it to you right away.
Right.
I took Japanese jiu-jitsu, man.
Oh, really?
It was really good, but we never did any live training. When I look back on the techniques, at the time I wasn't as far along in this as I am now. I wouldn't have known like, oh, this is BS or this is good. But looking back, the techniques were all really good. Anytime any like small joint or wrist lock type stuff materialized, it was used to set up better forms of control. A lot of the throws looked more like judo, but it was never trained live.
A lot of my viewers would be like, oh, Japanese jiu-jitsu is the functional version of Aikido. But I look at every single video I looked at, it's always cooperative training, never pressure testing, no competitive elements, which doesn't have to necessarily be there, but usually pressure testing leads to it. And I'm like, what's the point? I guess it's better maybe than Aikido in that regard because you get exposed to these techniques and you get familiar with those mechanics, but unless you train things under pressure, it's not going to be useful. It's interesting that there may be a martial art which actually would be good if it would add pressure testing. Because Aikido, if you would add pressure testing, you'd lose most of the techniques.
I don't think any Aikido would materialize.
Right, exactly. Like tiny portion, maybe I'd say 10%.
Or in the case of exceptional people, because, and I've been sent, just like you have, I've been sent videos of some stuff happening, and it's always extraordinary circumstances or attribute mismatch. Exactly. A 300-pound bouncer definitely can wrist lock a drunk who has his back turned. You know? It's like, it worked. He could have done anything. He could have done a capoeira kick. I give Bushido and McDojos a bigger pass than most people because everyone's always talking about false confidence. I don't think it's real. I don't think you develop confidence in what you're doing without sparring. Whatever you were going to do before you took a fake martial art, that's what you do after you took the fake martial art if you never sparred.
I can attest to that. I did try to convince myself that I'm confident while I was doing Aikido, but I never really was. And I met a bunch of Aikido guys when I would talk to them more closely. They would actually admit that they don't have confidence either. We'd play like we do because I'm a black belt, so I have to have confidence.
You're supposed to,
Right, exactly. But
behind closed doors, all of you guys were thinking the same thing.
Right, but then exactly, if shit hits the fan, or those situations came up, I had like tremendous doubt and fear because I wouldn't know. I would freak out. I wouldn't know what to do. Now that I have combat sports training, and self-defense training, it's not like it's gonna save me 100% every time. But I'm like, okay, I know how to kick this guy's ass just in case.
Yeah. You've been knocked down before. You've been punched before. You've been strangled before.